Welcome to Nonprofit Thrive, a podcast where we learn from the humans who are helping nonprofits succeed in the digital world. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome. I'm Ben Freda, host of the show, where we share the stories of leaders in the nonprofit space, the people behind the organizations, the foundations, the companies that help nonprofits change the world. Recent episodes of the show include Eric Brown of Brownbridge Strategies. We talked about strategy and communications consulting for nonprofits, and he actually introduced me to today's guest. So thank you to Eric. We also had Kate Purcell of KP Creative Strategy. That was a couple of shows ago. A web designer for nonprofits, and she talked about important things to think about when you're doing a web design project. Go check that episode out as well. Before I get into today's guest, who I'm super excited to have on, I do need to let you know the podcast is brought to you by BFC Digital, where we offer web development that helps nonprofits thrive on the web. If you work at a nonprofit or a foundation or another type of social change organization, I'm sure you know how hard it is to find reputable, responsive, friendly, kind web support to get your web issues taken care of. At BFC Digital, we help our clients succeed on the web by being the web developers you wish you had sitting at the desk next to you, or maybe working from home that you could hit up on Slack, or working from a beach, whatever. We help you fix your bugs, evolve your web presence, design new campaign pages, integrate that new donation system that your fundraiser is so psyched about. We do it all without ever having you fill out a support ticket, because support tickets are the worst, and we treat you just like a normal human. Go to bfcdigital.com to learn more. So today, thanks to Eric Brown, I have on, I'm very excited to bring on the podcast, Nolan Haims. He has decades of experience designing visual communications for the largest organization. He trains organizations to communicate more visually and create compelling stories with data. He's worked with clients like the Hewlett Foundation, the Central Park Conservancy, the Center for Effective Philanthropy. He also speaks at national conferences. He writes a lot about visual storytelling, and he's also one of the co-hosts of an excellent podcast called Presentation Podcast. Check that out. He is also one of only 15 Microsoft PowerPoint MVPs in the US. So he has a direct line to the people that make PowerPoint to help update and change it. He's also finally the author of The Better Deck, which is, we'll get into this as a book/tool set about presentations. And he runs his own design consultancy in Montclair, New Jersey. Nolan, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Very excited to talk about presentations, visual storytelling, very relevant to almost everybody that I know. But before we get into that, one of the things I like to do is just get into, who you are and how you started, where you ended up, how you ended up where you are now. So, when you were a kid, let's say, growing up, I don't know if you grew up in New Jersey, but what were you thinking about what you wanted to do at that point?
It was Connecticut. Well, I wanted to play first base for the Yankees, but that didn't last long. I have many past lives. I was actually a professional magician, juggler, and circus performer when I was a kid growing up.
No way! Wow,
yeah, it's a weird. We always say, sort of in the presentation world, nobody. There's no training, there's no path to get to work in the presentation industry. Right. So we all take really weird paths. Mine was maybe weirder than others, but yeah. So I was a professional performer. I never worked at the mall when I was a kid. I was actually performing and making money. I knew I didn't want to ultimately be a performer. I went to Northwestern. I got a degree in theater. So slightly more legitimate. Like you look at the levels of, maybe theater's a little more legitimate than magic. Magic's above ventriloquism, so you got those levels. So I got a real degree, partly a degree in dramatic writing. So I tell people I literally have a degree in storytelling. So I know that. And then I was a theater director and playwright in New York and Chicago and around the country for about a decade. Doing pretty well, directing all over the place. And I tell people I, made my fortune in theater and retired. And actually, I was My day job was temping, like that was sort of
Sure.
office work and graphic design. I'd sort of self-taught there, so I was always doing that on the side. And I uh, one day I was working at some office, and my boss said, "I have to do this presentation. Can you do it for me? Can you make it for me?" And I knew it was you use this software called PowerPoint. I was like, "Sure, I'll figure it out." And this was many years ago when it was much clunkier. And I did, and I just presentation is a small niche in the design world that nobody wants to do. So if you do it and you do it well, you get good at it and you become very in demand. So basically, I eventually started being hired by agencies, and I kept getting offered jobs to design presentations, mostly in the corporate world. But my side gigs sort of at this time were because I was always designing on the side for extra money. I kind of fell into the nonprofit foundation world. The Hewlett Foundation was, I think, maybe my first client. And then, if you work in that industry, executive migration, people move around and they pass your name around. And so I ended up working for Packard and Irvine and Center for Effective Philanthropy and just like MacArthur, like just people would go different places. So I've worked for tons and tons of foundations and continue to do that. And then eventually as I said, I made my fortune in theater, and I basically, moved on. I got hired by Edelman, which was the largest PR, might still be the largest PR firm in the world, to found an industry first presentation department, basically dedicated to visual communication. So I founded that and ran that in New York for about 5 years, and then just had enough and decided to go out on my own. And I fortunately had all these side clients that really helped taking that leap. A lot of my foundation clients, I was like, all right, I've got these clients. I can survive for a little bit, and then of course, it worked,
Yeah.
And that's where I am today. So I've for the last 15 years, maybe, have been 12 years, I don't know, have been running my own shop, small little boutique agency.
So how come, why is it that presentation design is not a place where designers want to go? I mean, it sounds like kind of the ultimate in design, right? Like you're telling a story personally.
It can be very cool. Like you see, Apple just had a big, launch yesterday, right? Or a big, whatever. And all that stuff, any screen behind all those cool graphics, that's presentation. Now they're using Keynote and probably After Effects and other things, but like that's presentation. You see a big car launch or product launch, that's presentation. You see a TED Talk, presentation. I think the reason it has, I mean, there are a lot of reasons it has a really bad name, but it's primarily because the primary tool has always been PowerPoint. That's the industry standard. And it's not a design tool. It's just not, you can use it well if you know what you're doing. And I do, and a lot of the top people do, but it's not Adobe. Adobe never launched a presentation tool, which was stupid. They should have. But it has this bad name of like, oh, I don't want to work in PowerPoint because I don't want to use this font. I want to use my fonts. I want to do and they just don't know it. So to be perfectly frank, to this day, your average presentation designer gets paid more and can command more than your average web designer or your average print designer or digital. It just is because people don't want to do it.
That seems super strange to me, but I mean, whatever. Yeah. And do you think, do you think the software really does hold people back? I mean, if they're like, is power and how do you talk to, you were kind of jumping forward to something I want to talk about later, but I'm super interested too in your advisory role with PowerPoint. How do you advise them, and what do you think how should the software move forward?
So I'm a Microsoft PowerPoint MVP. Microsoft has an MVP program across all their products. I mean, they have hundreds and hundreds of weird products of, networking and security products and all different things. And obviously one of those products is Microsoft Office, and including PowerPoint. So for the past 10, 12 years, I've been an MVP. There are about 15 of us in the US. Maybe they're about 40 or 50 worldwide. It's a small group, and we are a direct link to the development team. We talk with them all the time. We have a direct line. We're constantly on email threads thrown back and forth. And we advise them on, we're kind of a link between users and them. So, any company, and I assume other companies have similar things. They're up in their tower. They don't really know how users are using things or what they want. So we find bugs for them. We make recommendations. We ask and ask and ask for them to do certain things that they never do. We don't get paid. They send us a t-shirt every once in a while. But no, we're not on staff. We're just sort of an advisory that they can take it or leave it, basically. Sometimes things we bring up make it into the program, and sometimes we've been asking for 20 years and it'll just never go in. That's
interesting. Are you allowed to tell me one of the things that you've been asking for 20 years?
Sure.
Oh, please. Let's hear it.
Paragraph styles, better data visualization tools. You take off that stupid blur on the wipe that they put in a while back. And they often say we're the 1% of users, like we're the power users. And like they make their money off the 99% of corporate office users that don't care about this and don't care about the JS extensibility add-on ability, whatever. But still they're a really good group. It's a really interesting group.
I mean, I'm sure they're running whatever recommendations you have. They're running through some sort of formula as to whether it's worth it to do. Right. I mean, they have just like anything, they have priorities and they have bosses. And today it's all AI all the time. I mean, I will say that the one thing that I always laugh and cry about at the same time, when we've been in meetings with them and we've asked for some, or we've been talking about things that they might pursue or might change, like, we'll focus on this, and there'll be like a big list on the board, and they'll ask us, if you could pick the top 3 things to do, like, tell us what should we focus on here? Yeah. And we say, well, do it all. You're Microsoft. Why can't? And they say, well, we have limited engineering abilities and limited engineering budgets. And I say, you're Microsoft. You don't have
trillions of dollars. You don't. What do you mean budget?
You don't have limited. You don't have any limitations. Yeah,
exactly. I have limited budget. Microsoft should not. But anyway.
That's really funny. One thing that I'm jumping around here a lot, but one of the things I did notice that you said a minute ago was better data visualization tools in PowerPoint. And I also noticed on your website, you sort of have 2 separate schools of thought on sort of presentations in general, and then also data visualization presentations, I think. Can you talk a little bit about what the differences are and how they're similar and how they're different and ways to think about that?
Sure. So, and by the way, I just launched my new website like 3 days ago. So I don't know if you saw the old one or the new one.
The new one. The new one. It's good, man. It looks good.
Thank you. The orange, right? So, we still do presentation design, but we've been moving more towards a almost exclusive training offering. Well, you can give us a call if you need presentation design. To give us a call. But the reason for the web redesign was we're now focusing more exclusively on training people, basically teaching people to fish. And I bucket it into 2 main areas. What we call present your story, which is qualitative presenting, your more traditional PowerPoint images and words, and then present your data, which is quantitative presenting. So that's what you're asking about, which is data storytelling, data visualization, and understanding, most presentations have a mix of both. But, if we train a financial organization, usually all they want is the present your data. If we, train, a creative agency or something, like, we don't really do charts and graphs, just, keep it, present your story. But very often we'll mix the 2 of those. But that's how I sort of bucket presentation into those two areas.
Got you. And focusing on the story one first, what are some mistakes that, let's say, nonprofits or foundations would often make in creating a presentation?
Too many words.
Too many words.
Too many words. I mean, what my friend Dave Brady does this annual PowerPoint frustration survey, like what, or presentation, like what angers you, what frustrates you about presentation. And year after year, it's too much content.
Too much content. Okay.
That's simply what it comes down to. Too much content, too many bullet points. And we'll get to my quest to get rid of bullet points. But I guess I should talk about the two, when I train organizations, nonprofit or corporate, because there's no difference. I mean, and people say, well, is your training different for, C-suite people or, EVPs versus like, no, it's
presentation is a presentation, right? I mean, communication is communication.
Right. Okay. So I tell people that when you launch PowerPoint or Google Slides or Canva, whatever, you basically have a choice of what you're using that software for. You can use it to create a speaker guided on-screen presentation, which is what the software was basically designed for, right? To replace, 35 millimeter slides and stuff. That's where somebody's at the front of the room or on Teams or Zoom, and there's a screen. The speaker is speaking to that information. That's what it was, designed for. That's what people are familiar with. Or you can use it to basically create a document that is not speaker guided. That's a PDF that's emailed around or physically printed or whatever. And that's totally kosher. That is fine to do. PowerPoint is not a document processing tool, but we teach people how to use it as such because it's easier to use than Word, than InDesign. People know it. But I tell people you have to make that choice. This idea of a hybrid presentation, I'm going to put it up on screen and I'm going to hand it out. We have some solutions for, the kind of hybrid presentation and how to do that. But in general, it doesn't work. It's like you can't design an advertorial and then put it up on a billboard. Like those are two different formats. Did they still make
a radio ad and then put it in the newspaper? I mean, that's not going to work.
Right. They are different formats. Your content, your story can be the same, but the format has to be different. So you've got to make that decision. If it's a document, great, go to town. You want to give somebody 100 slide or page, whatever you want to call it, detailed report because that's what they're asking for. Great, that's what they need. But if you have 15 minutes, 20 minutes to get up in front of somebody and put slides up, you can't do 100 slides. You can't do 200 words on a slide. You just can't. You have to speak and say more than what's on the screen. You have to expand and expound upon it. I've heard so many people say, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to get to that, so I'll just put bullet points up behind me.
So you think that's the reverse, basically? That's the reverse attitude. You should be putting less on the slides and more in your mouth, as opposed to... Okay.
Otherwise, why are you there? If you don't need to be there, then send a PDF and make it a document, make it a memo or whatever. If you are there in the room, you're the presentation. There's a reason you're there. So don't walk people through a novel. Don't walk people through a report. You can hand that out before or after, whatever you need to do. But what you present on screen needs to be 1 slide, 2 slides a minute. So, I mean, come on. And if you're presenting remotely, you actually we recommend using more slides because you don't have the physical presence in the room to hold their attention. Basically, it's the slide that's holding their attention.
Ooh, now that's interesting.
So you need to keep things moving more. You can't sit on a slide for 5 minutes on a Teams call. That doesn't work.
I gotcha. So fewer words. How do you pick what words to
get rid of?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, to be honest, I feel like my hunch is that a lot of people use it as a way of organizing their own thoughts as to what they're going to say, and then they leave it in, right? Whereas they're almost using it as notes. But anyway, maybe that's wrong.
Nobody edits a presentation, right? We talk about that, and nobody outlines a presentation. But if you were to write a detailed report after 6 months of research, you're going to outline, you're going to edit, you're going to go over. But a presentation's like, I just threw my bullet points in and let me throw it up there. Like, you don't take that time. So in the training, we teach people how to outline a presentation. We teach people how to edit it, how to edit down words. I'll give you 2 examples. There are literal ways of getting rid of words. Something called the 3-word challenges. You try to get every item of text, every bullet point, every header down to 3 words without losing the message. And the reward is in the trying. So then if you have a 10-word header and you try to get it down to 3 words, but you're only able to get it down to 5 without sort of losing the meaning. And again, we're supposed to be saying more than what's up there. So if you get it from 10 words down to 5, in my opinion, you made that header 50% better.
Right.
Congratulations. You can also just use more slides. right? So you have 100 words on a slide. That's not glanceable. People can't, and that slide should be like billboards, glanceable. So that doesn't work. But you split that slide into 10 slides, each with 10 words. Now you have 10 glanceable slides. Congratulations. Same amount of material.
So the goal is to make the slides glanceable, not readable. Glanceable. Okay.
We say in about 3 to 5 seconds. So, and again, this is speaker guided. This is not
right.
PDF,
Exactly. Right. So, this is where you're telling more than is on the slide. Right.
Right. So 3 to 5 seconds, they glance at it, they get the gist, they absorb it, and they return their focus to you. Gotcha. Again, otherwise, why are you there?
Right. Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of if you were going to advise on the other side of that, the data visualization side, is that's probably a bit more complex, I guess, right?
It can be. And again, honestly, this is where industries content does tend to be, can be very different. But what we recommend, what we teach is something called the 1 second chart, which is how to design a chart that can be understood in as close to 1 second as possible. So currently you put up a chart, it's 3D, it's got bad colors, there's a legend, there's grid lines, there's junk, everything, right? It's like bad PowerPoint charting. And it takes your audience it takes them like 10, 12 seconds to read it and figure it out. 10, 12 seconds, they're not listening to you. And they're like, they know you, the speaker, knows what this chart means, but we're playing this game. You figure it out. Like, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to make it as hard. And you so if you can redesign that chart to be instantly glanceable, and now it can be read in 1, 2, 3 seconds. Great. I return your attention. Yep. Credibility shoots up. I know what you're saying. Tell me more. So that's what we teach. Now, again, more complex data, even very, very complex data, we can do this with. It depends. And sometimes it will take more effort and work. But we're not making presentations for us. We're making it for our stakeholders.
Right.
So, for example, if you're at a foundation and you're trying to get somebody to, cut $1 million check to this program or whatever, you put up a presentation, you put up a chart, and if that chart is like, well, okay, I'm trying to figure this out. The person's a smart person, on the other end, like what the data you're trying to show, but it takes them a while to figure it out. And versus you put it up and they know instantly, oh, wow, this is a problem. Oh, this is in need of funding. And then you can have that conversation. So your credibility goes up. It's the same in the corporate world too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of mixing stories and data, I mean, that's kind of what people are talking about now. How would you sort of think about that if you wanted to have a presentation with both? I mean, I guess you would just go slide by slide and.
Yeah, I mean, again, most presentations are a mix of both, depending on the industry and the topics. Sometimes it's more data, sometimes it's less. But yeah, you should. And again, some of the best practices apply to both. Like we pay a lot of attention to headers. So the headers should be written on a slide. If you're going to use headers, you don't have to, but that basically tells you what the slide's about in as few words as possible. If you put a chart up, you should have a title to that chart that tells you what the meaning of that data is as quickly as possible. Okay. So you don't put up something that says strategy phase 3. You put up something that says we need $1 million to launch the product. Okay, great. But I know what we're saying.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Can you talk too about, you mentioned wanting to abolish bullet points, right? So what's that about? I feel like half the presentations I see are just bullet point slides.
Yeah. Right, because it's easy. Yeah. And PowerPoint, again, to their discredit, is that a word? They have that awful default view where it's like, put up a blank slide and it's like, put your header here, put your bullet points here. And we've been trained.
Got you.
Right? I mean, it's the only program that I know of that when you open it and you get a blank canvas or whatever, it tells you what kind of information to put in. Like you open Word, and it doesn't say start writing iambic pentameter. Like you open Excel, it doesn't say put quarterly sales figures here. But PowerPoint's like put your bullets here. You got to use bullets. And so people do. And again, that gives it a bad name. The better thing should have been the default should just be a blank slide. We won't get there. But we're talking about bullet points. So yeah, I'm really on this crusade and have been for a long time to get rid of them. And professional designers generally don't use bullet points. They find ways to take those words. And I'm not saying get rid of words, because graphic design, my favorite definition is the interplay of image and text. So we're going to have text. But it's to take that text and to lay it out in such a way that there aren't those little bullet characters, so that the information is still readable and better glanceable and all that. And it's essentially a technique called chunking. Yes. It's the kind of thing I do on a daily basis all the time. Even good web designers do it as well. And so you find graphic design ways of laying it out. And I've been doing it for years, but I still, when I get a slide with bullet points, I'm like, okay, what do I do? I know what I should. I know I should chunk it out, but how? Like what? It's kind of like writer's block. And so I have, a lot of designers have inspiration files that we steal from and think of, And so a few years ago, I was like, I want to give these sort of inspiration files to other people and teach people how to do this. So I created the Better Deck. It's a physical deck of 52 cards, these nice oversized cards. And on the front are 52 variations on chunking, different ways you can lay out bullet points on a slide without that actual bullet point. And then on the back of each card are 3 real world examples of slides that use that technique that you can steal from. So depending on your content, you're like, I'm staring at bullet points. I'm not a designer. I don't know what to do. Pull a card out, flip through it. Oh, that's a cool way of doing it. Great. Oh, I didn't know I could pair them with icons. I could put them in a grid. Oh, I could do a staircase. Oh, I could do a spiral. Oh, I could, put them in it this way. I could put it on. And so that was the deal. So it's a physical deck. We also have there's a PDF version. There's also the PowerPoint source files. If you're really lazy, you can just buy those and just paste the slides in and then put in your own content, swap it in. So
what was the process of making the Better Deck like? I mean, you create, and how come? It's interesting because it's a deck of cards, which I love. And I've seen this elsewhere too, be really effective in terms of giving people, a tool to help them, do something differently, to give them inspiration for doing something a little bit differently. But how did you come up with the idea of making a deck out of it? How did the idea come up in the first place? How did you come up with the idea of making a deck out of it? And then how did you get the deck done? I mean, the whole thing sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it took years of just stalls and stops and trying to basically gathering as I would design slides. Whenever I did it, I would say, oh, that's a good solution. And I'd like, oh, I guess I can categorize that. And I'd squirrel away the slide. And so I had to basically design all these slides. There are over 150 designed examples in there. And so I would do that all the time. And then, when it got to the end, I had to make some new ones and, swap in some generic imagery and things. But one of my favorite things that I've had on my shelf for years is Roger Van Oak's Creative Whack Pack. Do you know that?
Don't know it. No, don't know it.
It was one of the first decks of cards, like creative inspiration cards. Yeah. And it's a deck of cards that just give you basically thought starters for when you're sort of creatively stuck, and like different techniques for breaking that. And I was like, that's really cool. It's not a book. I think he actually wrote a book later, but it's just this neat other way. So I always wanted to make something like that. And this just seemed like a natural fit rather than a book that you have to pull out each time and flip through. Like this is more tactile. Literally, it's easier to have on the side of your desk. I hear from a lot of people. I keep it on the side of my desk whenever I need an idea. I just pull it out and I flip through. And then, I designed it myself and took a while. Had to find a printer overseas to print it and cross my fingers when I hit, buy and, it was on a container ship coming, and open up these huge boxes. And I was like, oh yeah, actually it's exactly what I wanted. So
when you find somebody to make a deck like that, do they send you like a sample of how it's going to end up like, or
we spent months going back and forth. I'm like, I need to see samples. Different, here, this is, a factory that makes playing cards basically. So they can do anything. They're like, here are the 15 finishes you want, or if you want something else, we'll do that. Like, how do you want your box made? It's a cool, like magnetic closure. I was going to do something very simple. And my wife was like, no, it's all about packaging. So, I mean, they're amazing. They sent me proofs and went back and forth and
totally. And what was the day like when you finally realized they had arrived? Right.
Like,
were you psyched?
Like these stacks and stacks of boxes outside my house. My neighbors had no idea what was going on. It was neat. And I still have stacks all around my house because I sell it. I sell it on Amazon, but I also sell it through my website. That's the primary way. So we fulfill orders come in, we got to ship them out. So
that is so cool, and such a creative process too of creating. And I kind of like the idea. I mean, the playing card idea makes perfect sense because you're talking about how to make things chunkable. Mm-hmm. And a playing card, a deck of cards is chunkable, right? Like in a way, a book isn't, right? Like a book is all connected, and you kind of have to go you're from one end to the other and all that kind of stuff. This deck of cards you could throw up in the air, and any one of them you could pick out, and it would be a chunk.
Right, and that's an interesting point. I have never believed in systems. Maybe it's because I'm lazy. Maybe it's because I don't have a short attention span.
In general,
just in general system. Well, I'm not talking about like municipal water systems. Like I'm all for that. But like story systems. Now
story
again,
systems.
I technically have a degree in storytelling, and I know them all. I know Joseph Campbell, and I know,
Are you talking about like Hero's Journey and stuff like that?
Yeah, there are lots of different ways to sort of view a story, and I know them all. But I've always been very skeptical of people teaching presentation and saying, well, the way to make a good presentation is to find who your protagonist is and to make it like the plot of Star Wars and to have this and that.
Yeah.
Now, all of those things, and there are a few out there that are more formulaic, that they're not. None of them are wrong. Like if you follow that path, you will end up with a decent story. And if you have your instigating event and your conflict and all that, and if you want to look at, like Nancy Duarte's Resonate, it's a phenomenal book about analyzing famous presentations and things like that. They're all valid. They all work. But in the real world, I know when you're trying to push a deck out, you don't have time to break it down and whiteboard it. And you hope you can outline, and that's why everything I teach is modular. And I don't believe there's such a thing as a good slide, a good deck, a good chart. And there's no such thing as a bad chart or a bad slide. There's better and there's worse. Okay. And every decision you make, whether you choose to chunk those bullet points out, whether you choose to, take that header down from 10 words to 5, every decision whether you choose to make that box green or dark green or light green, do I use this font or that? Every decision will make that presentation better or it's going to make it worse. Right. And your goal should be on this continual path of betterment, always making those decisions. So all our training, every single thing is modular. It's not like you have to go through these 12 steps to get a better presentation, because I know you don't have the time. If you have 5 minutes to make a slide better, you're going to use this technique. If you have 10 minutes to make that bar chart better, you're going to use these techniques. If you have, tomorrow, a half hour to make these 3 slides better, you're going to use other techniques we've given you. You have more time now. Right. That's what it is.
You pick a section you want to improve, you improve that section. But what about do you have any sort of general principles for like how they should flow? Right. Like obviously it depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, you could do a presentation to your, I don't know, like for the example before, you can be doing a presentation to a big funder for this foundation, right? Like, the funder is interested in climate change. Maybe you talk about climate change work. I mean, is there like a way you should be thinking about how that should flow, where there's like a climax or something, or is that all kind of BS?
No, it's not. And again, if you follow one of those, you're not wrong, and you're not going to necessarily end up with a bad presentation. I do teach presentation structure. But what I teach is very simple. 2 types, two structures you can pick from. And this is when I make my own presentations, this is how I pick from. The two types are called B3E or 3 things. B3E stands for beginning, 3 things, and end. So essentially, you write a little up front that could include the history, the introduction, the challenge, whatever, but basically keep it as short as possible because nobody cares. People want to get into your 3 main things you want to say. Okay. 3 stories, 3 challenges, 3 questions, and you can umbrella them, right? You can have sub questions and things, but think of it that way. And then the E stands for end, which is your wrap up, your call to action, whatever. Again, keep it as short as possible, and please don't end on Q&A. Do your Q&A and bring it back to yourself just for a minute or 2, so you can wrap up, and those will be the last words that you leave people with, not the
that's interesting.
Yeah, not the lame question from that guy in the back.
I almost never see people do that, honestly. Like
Yeah.
usually it's Q&A in the end and that's it. And there's no wrap up. Wow, that's interesting.
It just like, it lets all the air out. I mean,
It does.
usually because you don't have the control of how you end. You ended on the last question, which can be lame. So that's one of the techniques, B3. And then the other technique is called three things, in which you get rid of the beginning and you get rid of the end and you come right out and you say, I'm going to tell you three things, and you go for it. And it's, so if you have a 45-minute talk, for example, I mean, this helps you too, not just the audience. Suddenly you don't have a 45-minute talk. You have 3 15-minute talks, and you split it up that way. Have you seen Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement speech?
No, I haven't.
Just YouTube it. It's good. But he comes out there. It's one of the few times he sort of talked outside of Apple, and he talks for about 15 seconds. He says, I never graduated college. I didn't think I, would ever be here. And he said, I want to tell you 3 stories. That's it. All I'm going to do. Story number 1. And that is his structure. He literally comes out and tells 3 stories. And people, it's a really, really great speech.
I love that, because he doesn't even try to sort of hide it. He's not trying to like sneak the stories in to give them he's just like, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. That's it. That's how it's going to go. Yeah.
There's no like, could he have hired somebody, a writer to craft your transitions and your instigating event?
Doesn't matter.
No, that's not what people are going to remember. And by the way, the only thing people will ever remember, I'm sorry to say, is a story.
Yeah. Okay. Talk about that for a second, because that is becoming clearer and clearer to me too. Yeah. And that's psychology, right? Is that what that is? Human psychology?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't, but that's, nobody remembers a bullet point. Nobody remembers a chart. Nobody remembers a statistic. They might remember it for the day, a few hours, but long term, they're only going to remember a story. So here's my metaphor, or my analogy for stories. I want you to think about your content as a Twinkie.
Okay.
So your content is the creamy filling inside, right? That's your message, what you're trying to say. And if you just slap that on a plate and put it out there, it's not going to be very appetizing. It's also not going to last very long. It'll start to melt, whatever. But you wrap it in the delicious golden cake of a story, and then it has infinite shelf life. Right? So wrap your content in a story if you can do it. And don't be afraid to be personal. I mean, really. Those 3 stories that Jobs told, those were personal stories.
All right.
One of the best presentations, and this comes into visuals as well, was a pitch that a colleague was doing at Edelman when I was there. And he was pitching a pharma company to work on some new malaria initiative in, I think, Africa. And we had started working on the presentation together, and it was, typical kind of dry stuff. And at one point, like days into it, he said, Nolan, I want to win this. I really want to win this. I know this. I mean, I've been to Africa. I've worked on malaria initiatives over there. Like, that's what I did after college. And I said, whoa. I said,
why aren't you saying that?
I said, do you have photos of this? And he said, oh yeah, I have a shoebox at home with them. I was like, oh my God. I said, Chad, bring them in. Right. He brought them in, and suddenly we had photos of him actually doing this work that he is pitching, not bullet points, but photos. And he's like, and he had stories like, oh yeah, here's with me with this little girl that I met with her father on the way to church. And I'm like, that's a story.
That's fascinating. So that's what made it an amazing presentation. The personal story, personal touches. Yeah, it's so funny. I think I read somewhere that music, and the reason we have songs is because it's a way of imparting stories.
Yeah.
The songs are a story.
Yeah. The best and the most lasting stories are the songs that I think have good stories.
Interesting. That's weird. I think maybe something about human psychology, something about the way that we're wired. Who knows? So
around the campfire. Yeah. I mean, that's
so if you want somebody to remember, so I guess the secret then would be to create a story that is going to leave them with whatever the message is that you want. Right. So if it's whatever the company is, should do the malaria initiative in Africa. So the story would be something related to what the need is and how they can make a difference or something, right?
Yeah. And I know it's hard to, it's hard sometimes to find that perfect story. Like, oh, I don't have any stories, like, nothing sort of relevant. But I'm just constantly shocked by the number of times I accidentally learn about a story from a presenter, and then we have to put it in. Just a couple of weeks ago, I'm working with the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard and Smithsonian, and one of the speakers is talking about a great program they have called the STARS program, which is trying to get telescopes into rural schools. Right.
Okay.
Why? Okay. To teach STEM and to create the next generation of astronomers and astrophysicists. Great. Yeah. And we're talking, and there's like pictures of, here's the telescopes we want to build, get, and this and that. And we started talking about stories. I said, like, I'd love to know, like, more specifically, like what are there, what have been the results? Have you had any successes? And she's like, oh yeah, tons. I was just having lunch the other day with, Julie. She, I met her, 10 years ago as a child in school. And now she's, doing her PhD. I'm like, in astrophysics. I'm like, oh my God. I said, okay. A, I need a picture of Julie. And B, you need to put that in the presentation. This was literally a donor presentation. I'm like, that is the story. That's the only thing people will take away from. Right. Yeah. Like the stories are there. You just have to sort of acknowledge or understand that that's what people want.
It's so funny because and I'm trying to think of the work that we do, obviously, with, nonprofits and impact organizations, et cetera. We're doing websites for them. We're doing web development for them. And there's a bunch of different sort of ways that they want to use the technology to further their mission. So sometimes, for instance, it's an organization that's trying to get information out there, that make information about. We did a site recently. It was called Healthy Newborn Network. So the point is to get academic studies about how maternity health works to practitioners. That's the goal. So, and then you have on the other end of the spectrum, you have other organizations that are even campaign organizations, right, who are trying to say something, convince some people of something. And then you have all these others in the middle trying to protect a certain group or whatever. And so there's all kinds of sort of different reasons why these materials exist. And so it's funny to think about how, stories trying to convince somebody of something are very effective. Stories in trying to get people to, I guess, read and understand data is sort of a different, maybe more difficult thing to do, or maybe it isn't. Am I just thinking about this wrong?
The stories are there. Sometimes you're gonna have to work harder. If you put up a chart about, I don't know, why you should invest in this precious metal, because I'm just taking this example and like, oh, well, I'm going to show this chart of how, the metrics on it show that now's the time to buy whatever. Okay, well, that is a chart. Nobody's going to remember that. But there's got to be go deeper. Why is this metal important? Now, we're not talking about like, what, I'm just going to invest to make money, like end of story. But what does this metal do? Now I want to know, it's because it's used in EV batteries. And now I'm going to tell you, like, the fact that I was, in a parking lot the other day, and I couldn't believe I literally didn't see one car that wasn't an EV and this or that or whatever. Like everybody, and this is insane. And these batteries need to come from somewhere. And I'm telling you that the percentage of this metal, blah, blah, that's a story. Right.
Right.
And it be as simple as that.
And a story has to have either a human or somebody you care about, maybe an animal or something, some empathetic center, right? Like a story, it can't just be about a rock rolling down a hill or something, unless you care about the rock, I suppose. But
or what that rock's hitting at the bottom or not hitting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. But so for this example of, hey, we made a website, sort of a knowledge portal, an information portal for people to find information about maternity health, maternal health. So maybe the story really is like, hey, there was a mother who gave birth in this underserved area, and she had a really troubled birth, and she was in a lot of difficulty. And somebody came here and got the information and treated her. And look, now she's alive, or now her kid is 4 years old. And here's a picture of the kid. Maybe that's kind of where you would go with it.
Yeah, we're a great example. We're seeing this now with the whole abortion situation, right? Where for years and years and up through, the Supreme Court decision, people, anti-abortion groups would say, oh, well, those are fringe cases, and there's no issue. That's the life of the mother will always be considered. Like, this is not a problem. Blah 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 blah. And then suddenly, and the left would always say, well, no, like it is a problem, and we need care. But now, after a lot of those laws were passed, you started seeing some of those stories
for sure.
People on the news saying, "Oh my God, I almost died." Like, this, because I couldn't get this. This was like a not viable pregnancy. That's a real story. That's a concrete.
Story. Yeah.
And you can't compete with that. Like, that is.
Yeah. That's a person who you care about on camera saying what happened to them. Yeah. Okay. That makes total sense. Listen, this has been an amazing conversation. This thing is going to end automatically in a few minutes. Nope. So I unfortunately need to wrap it. Okay. But I do want to say thanks for coming on. It was great information. Sure. It's super interesting to me, knowing so little about presentations. I am never going to use bullet points again. I am going to use these chunkable things instead. I'm never going to do Q&A as the last thing that I do. And I'm going to use more stories. So that's what I got out of it.
There you
so go. Far, plus a bunch of other stuff, obviously. But what I do want to ask, though, is can you just tell people where they can find out more about you? I know we mentioned a few things on the podcast, but sure. Where can they find out more about you and about what you do?
NolanHaimsCreative.com is my site. And you can get the deck at thebetterdeckdeck.com. That actually goes right to my site. So if you don't want to worry about spelling my last name, just go to thebetterdeckdeck.com. You can get it on my site and get a whole bunch of information about my training and about me and other stuff. And if you have a question, reach out. Like, honestly, I always tell people, like, I don't hide online. You got a question about whatever, even if you don't have a, project or design engagement or whatever, just, I'm happy to chat. Can reach me on LinkedIn too. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's part of being a Microsoft MVP. We're supposed to deal with the public and talk with them. And,
come on, you would do
we
it
actually
anyway.
Are supposed to engage.
You would do it even without that. I can tell. Nice guy. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Thrive podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.